The crossing guard's perfect view. The custody battle had been brutal. Daniel Morrison lost everything: his daughter, his visitation rights, his reputation. The judge's words were final: no contact until Sophie turns 18. But Daniel found a loophole. Public streets were public. Watching wasn't touching. Until crossing guard Margaret Thompson started watching him back. And what she discovered about Daniel Morrison would shock even the judge who'd protected him. Margaret Thompson stood at her corner post, as she had every school day for the past 15 years. The intersection of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue was her domain, her responsibility, her window into the lives of hundreds of families. At 71, her knees protested the standing. Her back ached by afternoon, but her eyes remained sharp, sharper than anyone knew. She'd seen it all from this corner. The divorces played out in separate drop-offs. The custody exchanges filled with tension. The single parents rushing, always rushing, trying to balance impossible schedules. But what she was witnessing now was different, dangerous, and it had been escalating for 4 months. The first time she noticed the blue Honda Civic, Margaret thought nothing of it. Cars passed her intersection constantly, but the driver never dropped off a child, never picked one up. He just sat there, engine running, eyes fixed on one particular student, 8-year-old Sophie Morrison. The second time, it was a white Toyota Camry, different car, same driver. Margaret's memory for faces was exceptional, a skill honed by years of memorizing which child belonged to which parent, which cars were authorized for pickup. The man's face was the same, though he wore different clothes, different sunglasses. Always watching Sophie. By the 3rd week, Margaret had started documenting. Her small notebook, usually reserved for recording safety violations or scheduling concerns, became a detailed log. Monday, September 5th, blue Honda Civic, license ADX 4521, 7:43 a.m. Arrival: departed 8:07 a.m. after Sophie entered school. Tuesday, September 6th, white Toyota Camry, license RTV 9088, 7:41 a.m. Arrival: driver wearing Yankees cap and aviator sunglasses. Wednesday, September 7th, black Ford F-150, license KLM 3467, same driver. Parked closer today, took photos with phone. The pattern was clear. Different cars every day, but always the same man. Always. Watching Sophie Morrison. Margaret knew Sophie well. A sweet child with strawberry blonde hair, who always said, "Good morning, Mrs. T," and waited patiently for the crossing signal. Her mother, Jennifer Morrison, usually walked her to school, holding her hand tightly, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings with the hypervigilance of a protective parent. It wasn't until Margaret overheard a conversation between Jennifer and another parent that the pieces clicked into place. "The restraining order is supposed to protect us," Jennifer was saying, her voice tight with fear. "But Daniel's smart. He knows exactly how far away to stay. 500 feet. He measures it. Can't the police do something?" The other parent asked. "He's not technically violating anything. Public street, legal distance. My lawyer says unless he makes contact or threatens us, there's nothing we can do. But I know he's planning something." A mother knows. Daniel. The name hit Margaret like a cold wind. Daniel Morrison, Sophie's father. The man in the different cars that evening. Margaret did something she'd never done before. She looked up the Morrison custody case online. What she found chilled her. Daniel Morrison, former investment banker, had lost custody after what the court documents called escalating, controlling behavior and psychological abuse. There were allegations of hidden cameras in his ex-wife's home, GPS trackers on her car, and a disturbing incident where he'd attempted to take Sophie from her daycare without authorization. The judge had issued a rare no-contact order, citing significant risk of parental kidnapping. But Margaret saw what the court didn't. The methodical planning, the careful distance, the rotation of vehicles that suggested access to resources and help. This wasn't a heartsick father hoping for a glimpse of his child. This was surveillance. This was preparation. Before we continue this alarming story, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that everyday heroes can prevent tragedies, hit that subscribe button. Justice System USA brings you stories that prove vigilance can save lives. Margaret's documentation became more detailed. She started arriving earlier, staying later. She borrowed her grandson's good camera and began taking photos. The evidence mounted. Daniel in the blue Honda, binoculars raised. Daniel, in a silver Mazda. Writing in a notebook. Daniel, in a green Subaru. On his phone. GPS visible on the dashboard. Daniel in a red pickup, with another man she didn't recognize. That last detail worried her most. Daniel wasn't alone anymore. The second man appeared more frequently as September turned to October. Younger, muscular, with the bearing of someone military or law enforcement. They would sit together, pointing at the school, timing something. With stopwatches. Once, Margaret saw them switch drivers without stopping, a maneuver that spoke of practice and planning. Margaret tried the official channels first. She called the non-emergency police line. Unless he violates the 500-foot restriction, or makes contact, there's nothing illegal happening, the officer explained, sounding bored. Lots of people drive past schools. She tried the school administration. Principal Roberts listened politely but explained that without a direct threat, they couldn't ban someone from public streets around the school. She even attempted to speak with Jennifer Morrison, but the woman was so stressed, so constantly on edge, that Margaret didn't want to add to her burden without solid proof of imminent danger. So Margaret did what she'd always done. She watched, she documented, and she prepared. The breakthrough came on a foggy Thursday morning in late October. Margaret arrived extra early, using the fog as cover to position herself differently. She saw Daniel's latest vehicle, a white van with tinted windows, arrive at 6:45 a.m., a full hour before usual. But he didn't park in his normal spots. Instead, he pulled into the staff parking lot, into a space that would be hidden from the main road but had a clear view of the kindergarten playground. Margaret's blood ran cold. Staff parking required a permit. How had he gotten one? She watched as Daniel and his companions studied the playground, took measurements, and then did something that made her hands shake. They tested the gate, the playground's back gate, the one that was supposed to be locked, but often wasn't, because teachers used it as a shortcut. They were planning a grab. Margaret was sure of it. She pulled out her phone and started recording, her hands steadier now with purpose. The two men spent 20 minutes checking sightlines, timing something, testing the gate's lock. Then they left, but not before Margaret caught a clear shot of the van's license plate and, crucially, the staff parking permit hanging from the mirror. That afternoon, Margaret didn't go home. Instead, she visited her nephew, Thomas, who worked in IT for the school district. Aunt Maggie, everything okay? Thomas asked, surprised to see her. I need you to look something up for me, Margaret said, showing him the photo of the parking permit. This permit number, who authorized it? Thomas hesitated. I could get in trouble. Asterisk, a little girl's life might be in danger, Margaret said, firmly. Please, Thomas. The answer came quickly, and was more disturbing than Margaret had imagined. The permit had been issued to a maintenance contractor hired to inspect playground equipment. The company, Morrison Facilities Management, had been registered just 2 weeks ago. The authorization signature belonged to a newly hired assistant principal who probably hadn't made the connection to the Morrison name. Daniel hadn't just found a loophole. He'd created one. Where are you watching from? Share this video with parents who need to know the signs of custody-related danger. Subscribe to Justice System USA and help us spread awareness that can save lives. Margaret knew she needed more than suspicious behavior and a fraudulent parking permit. She needed to prove intent. So she did something that went against every instinct she'd developed in 7 decades of life. She got close to danger. The next morning, she altered her routine. Instead of standing at her usual corner, she positioned herself near the staff parking lot, pretending to pick up litter. When the white van arrived, she was ready. Daniel and his companion, whom she now thought of as Muscle, got out and walked toward the playground. Margaret followed at a distance, her phone recording everything. They didn't notice the elderly woman in the bright crossing guard vest. She was invisible to them, just part of the landscape. What she overheard confirmed her worst fears. Thursday is Halloween, Daniel was saying. School parade, chaos, lots of strangers in costumes, perfect cover. You sure she'll be in the back? Muscle asked. Jennifer always volunteers for the kindergarten parade. She'd be distracted with setup. Sophie's class lines up by the back gate. 2 minutes max. Van to freeway in under 5. And then, safe house in Nevada first. Then Mexico. New names are ready. Sophie becomes Sophia. She's young enough to forget Jennifer eventually. Margaret's hand trembled as she recorded. This wasn't a vague plan. This was happening in 4 days. She retreated carefully, her mind racing. The police had dismissed her concerns before, but this was different. This was evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. But would they act fast enough? Would they believe a 71-year-old crossing guard over a wealthy man with good lawyers? Margaret made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew the rule-following, law-abiding woman she'd always been. She wouldn't wait for the system. She'd stop this herself. That evening, she called. "Jennifer Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, this is Margaret Thompson, the crossing guard at Jefferson Elementary. I need to speak with you urgently about your daughter's safety." The meeting took place in Jennifer's living room, curtains drawn, Sophie safely at a friend's house. Margaret laid out everything: the surveillance, the fake company, the parking permit, and finally, the recorded conversation about Halloween. Jennifer's face went from skeptical to terrified to furious as she listened to the recording. "My God," she whispered. "I knew it. Everyone said I was being paranoid, but I knew he was planning something." "We need to go to the police," Margaret said. "Tonight, with all of this evidence, they won't do anything," Jennifer said bitterly. "Daniel has connections. His lawyer plays golf with judges. Last time I tried to report his violations, I ended up being questioned about making false accusations. Then we go above local police. FBI handles kidnapping cases." Jennifer nodded slowly. Yes, okay. But Halloween is in 4 days. What if they don't act in time?" Margaret took the younger woman's hands. "Then we make sure Sophie isn't where Daniel expects her to be." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Jennifer's lawyer, galvanized by Margaret's evidence, filed emergency motions with the court. The FBI opened an investigation. The school district revoked the fraudulent parking permit and issued alerts to all staff. But bureaucracy moved slowly, and Halloween was approaching fast. Margaret maintained her normal routine, watching Daniel continue his surveillance, knowing he had no idea his plan was blown. She documented every appearance, building an airtight case. The FBI agents told her to act normal, to not tip him off while they gathered resources for the arrest. On Halloween morning, Margaret arrived at school to find organized chaos. Parents in costumes, excited children, teachers trying to maintain order. She took her position at the corner, her crossing guard vest over a witch costume she'd thrown on to blend in. At 7:45 a.m., the white van appeared, but something was different. Daniel was driving fast, agitated. He pulled into the staff lot and jumped out, muscle right behind him. They weren't waiting for the parade. They were moving now. Margaret grabbed her radio. Code red at the back playground. 2 men approaching. She'd convinced Principal Roberts to give her a security radio, just for today. Now her warning crackled across to every administrator and security guard on campus. Daniel and Muscle were moving fast toward the kindergarten area. Margaret, despite her age, moved faster. She positioned herself at the playground gate, the exact spot they needed to access. "I'm sorry," she said loudly, standing firm. "This gate is closed for maintenance today." Daniel stopped short, recognizing her for the first time, the crossing guard, the invisible woman who'd been there every day. "Move," he said, his carefully maintained control slipping. "I can't do that, Mr. Morrison," Margaret replied calmly. Behind him, she could see security guards and FBI agents converging. "And you need to step back. You're within 500 feet of your daughter." Daniel's face contorted with rage. "You don't understand. She's my daughter. Jennifer's poisoning her against me. I have rights." "Not anymore. You don't," Margaret said, as FBI agents surrounded them. The arrest was swift and efficient. Daniel Morrison and his accomplice, a private investigator with a record of helping parental kidnappings, were taken into custody. In the van, agents found fake IDs, hair dye, children's medication, and detailed plans for crossing into Mexico. Sophie Morrison never knew how close she'd come to disappearing. She participated in the Halloween parade, dressed as a princess, blissfully, unaware that a 71-year-old crossing guard had just saved her life. This story continues with an incredible twist. Keep watching, share with someone who needs to see this, and don't forget to subscribe to Justice System USA, because sometimes heroes wear reflective vests instead of capes. The aftermath revealed the true extent of Daniel Morrison's plan. The FBI investigation uncovered a network of professionals who specialized in parental kidnappings. Daniel had paid over $200,000 to ensure Sophie's disappearance would be permanent and untraceable. There were safe houses in 3 states, new identities complete with birth certificates and school records, a doctor ready to alter Sophie's appearance slightly, enough to match new ID photos, even a child psychologist who specialized in helping kidnapped children adjust to their new lives by slowly erasing memories of their real parents. Margaret's meticulous documentation became the cornerstone of the prosecution. Her notebooks, photos, and recordings showed a pattern of stalking and planning that went back not for months, but over a year. Daniel had been watching, learning, preparing long before Margaret noticed him. At the trial, Margaret took the stand. As the star witness, Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor began, "What made you decide to document Mr. Morrison's activities?" Margaret adjusted her glasses, looking directly at the jury. "I've been a crossing guard for 15 years. I've seen divorced parents at their worst and their best. But this was different. The calculation, the resources, the patience. This wasn't a father missing his child. This was a predator planning a hunt." Objection. Daniel's lawyer shouted. "Prejudicial characterization overruled," the judge said. "The witness is describing her observations." Margaret continued her testimony for 3 hours. She explained every entry in her notebooks, every photograph, every moment of escalating concern. The recording of Daniel planning the Halloween kidnapping was played for the jury. Several jurors visibly recoiled when they heard him coldly discussing how Sophie would forget Jennifer eventually. The defense tried to paint Margaret as a busybody, an elderly woman with too much time and an overactive imagination. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Thompson, that you have no law enforcement training?" the defense attorney asked. "That's correct. No experience in surveillance or investigation, just 15 years of watching over children. So you took it upon yourself to spy on my client, to invade his privacy." Margaret's voice was steel. "I took it upon myself to protect a child when the system failed. Mr. Morrison found every legal loophole to stalk his daughter. I found a way to stop him." The most damaging testimony came from Daniel's accomplice, Marcus Webb. Facing serious federal charges, he made a deal to testify against Daniel. He revealed that this wasn't Daniel's first attempt. There had been 2 previous plans, aborted at the last minute due to unforeseen circumstances. One had been stopped only because Sophie had been homesick from school that day. Mr. Morrison was obsessed, Webb testified. He had Sophie's room in the Mexico house already decorated exactly like her current one. He'd been recording Jennifer's voice and creating AI deepfakes to gradually replace her voice in videos, so Sophie would forget what her real mother sounded like. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, stalking, fraud, and multiple other charges. Daniel Morrison was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. At the sentencing, Jennifer Morrison spoke. "Margaret Thompson saved my daughter's life, while the system that was supposed to protect us failed. One woman with a notebook and the courage to act made all the difference. She saw what trained professionals missed. She cared when others looked away." Margaret received commendations from the FBI, the school district, and the city. She was offered speaking engagements and book deals. She turned them all down. "I just want to go back to my corner," she told reporters. "That's where I'm needed." But the case had changed things. Margaret's actions inspired a new protocol in schools across the country. Crossing guards, janitors, cafeteria workers, the invisible army that keeps schools running, were trained to spot signs of custody-related dangers. The Thompson Protocol became a standard part of school safety training. Margaret also worked with Jennifer's lawyer to establish Sophie's Law, legislation that closed the loopholes Daniel had exploited. The law made surveillance of a child by a non-custodial parent a felony, regardless of distance. It required stricter verification for school-related permits and contractors. It gave crossing guards and other school personnel legal protection for reporting suspicious behavior. 6 months after the trial, Margaret stood at her usual corner. Sophie Morrison bounded up to her, as she did every morning. "Good morning, Mrs. T," Sophie chirped, her mother close behind. "Good morning, sweetheart. Have a wonderful day." Jennifer paused, as she often did now. "Thank you, Margaret. Every day." "Thank you." Margaret just nodded, raising her stop sign for the next group of children. This was her job. This was her purpose. Not the heroics, not the recognition, but but this, making sure every child who crossed at her corner made it safely to where they needed to be. A year later, Margaret was reviewing her morning logs when she noticed something. A green sedan had passed by 3 times in the last week. Same time, slowing near the school, never stopping. Her hand reached for her notebook. Old habits, it seemed, died hard. She jotted down the license plate, made a note of the driver's description. It was probably nothing. A parent running late, a new resident learning the area. But Margaret had learned that the difference between paranoia and vigilance was often just perspective. And from her corner, she had the perfect view. That afternoon, she discreetly mentioned the green sedan to Principal Roberts, who promised to have security check it out. 2 days later, Roberts called her into his office. "You were right to report it," he said. The driver was a registered sex offender who'd just moved to the area. He wasn't supposed to be within 1,000 feet of a school. "He's been arrested." Margaret simply nodded. Another threat identified. Another child protected. Another day's work. That she walked back to her corner, she thought about all the Margaret Thompsons out there. The crossing guards, the lunch ladies, the janitors, the bus drivers, the people who saw everything but whom nobody really saw. They were the early warning system society didn't know it had. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie's mother. "Sophie, drew this for you in art class." The attached photo showed a child's drawing of a crossing guard with a superhero cape. Standing at a corner, children safely crossing around her. At the bottom, in careful kindergarten printing, "Mrs. T keeps us safe." Margaret smiled, tucking the phone away as the afternoon dismissal bell rang. Time to get back to work. Time to watch, to protect, to be the guardian at the intersection. Because that's what heroes do. They show up, they pay attention, they act when action is needed. Even if, especially if, they're just a 71-year-old woman with a stop sign and a notebook, standing on a corner, seeing everything. The Morrison case had taught the world an important lesson. The people we overlook might be the ones watching over us. The invisible guardians, the quiet protectors, the ones who notice when something isn't right and refuse to look away. Margaret Thompson had spent 15 years being invisible at her corner, but when a child needed protection, she became impossible to ignore, and in doing so, she reminded everyone that heroes don't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they wear bright yellow vests and hold stop signs. Sometimes they're 71 years old with arthritis and a keen eye. Sometimes they're the people we pass every day without really seeing. But they see us. They see our children. And when danger comes calling, they stand firm at their posts. An unexpected but unbreakable line of defense as the sun set on another school day. Margaret lowered her stop sign and headed home. Tomorrow she'd be back, watching over her corner, her children, her community, because that's what Margaret Thompson did. She watched, she protected, she cared, and sometimes that made all the difference in the world. Thank you for watching this remarkable story of how a crossing guard's vigilance prevented a kidnapping and changed child protection laws across the country. Margaret Thompson proved that heroes come in all ages, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay attention. Have you ever noticed something that others missed? Has someone you overlooked turned out to be important in your life? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Justice System USA, hit the notification bell. Share this video with parents, teachers, and anyone who needs to remember that protecting children is everyone's responsibility. Where are you watching from today? Whether you're in a big city or a small town, remember, there are Margaret Thompsons everywhere, quietly standing guard. They might be at school crossings, in cafeterias, driving buses, or cleaning classrooms. They see more than we realize, and they care more than we know. Until next time, this is Justice System USA, where we believe that in America, a crossing guard can stop a kidnapping, a janitor can expose corruption, and a lunch lady can recognize a missing child. Because justice isn't just about law enforcement, it's about every citizen who refuses to look away when something's wrong. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and remember, you don't need a badge to be a hero. You just need to care enough to act.